Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back into a world of velvet curtains, powdered wigs, and the persistent fear that lying flat in bed might be your final mistake. The world of Georgian aristocrats isn't all candlelit balls and witty conversation sometimes. It's just trying to sleep without crumpling your nightcap or accidentally dying in your sleep. Picture this. You're standing in the dim glow of a beeswax candle, staring up at a towering canopy bed so large it feels like you might need a ladder to conquer it. The room smells faintly of rosewater, coal smoke, and baked apples. And just beside you, a stiffly upright figure in a lace nightgown is already perched among a mountain of pillows. Tucked in for the night, not lying down, oh no, but propped nearly vertical like a fancy porcelain doll afraid to be shelved. Why? Well, tonight, that's exactly what we're going to explore. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it for you right now? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start by stepping into the bedroom of a Georgian aristocrat, a term that might conjure up Jane Austen ballrooms and horse-drawn carriages, but tonight we're skipping the dance floor and heading straight to the boudoir. And in this case, boudoir means a room stuffed to the rafters with elaborate furniture, porcelain figurines, and at least 3 decorative screens that serve no practical purpose except to look expensive. The bed dominates the room, tall, carved from mahogany or walnut, draped in layers of brocade and fringed silk. It's less a piece of furniture and more a domestic shrine. A small footstool waits below like a loyal servant, positioned for the nightly climb. You step closer. The mattress is stuffed with horsehair or feathers, depending on how fancy your backside prefers to be treated. And there, tucked into the headboard, are 2 firm bolsters angled just enough to keep your upper body awkwardly vertical, like you're in the world's softest dentist chair. Historians still argue whether these slanted sleeping positions were purely aesthetic, medicinal, or just a way to keep one's wig from collapsing in the night. But what's certain is that by the 1700s, the upright sleeping posture had become a visible sign of wealth, taste, and apparently a determination not to die lying down. You climb the bed. Or rather, you hoist yourself one carefully booted foot at a time onto the embroidered footstool, trying not to knock over a nearby vase filled with dried lavender. You plop into the soft nest of cushions and settle. Back not too far, just enough to look restful without horizontal vulnerability. A servant enters silently, always silently, and fluffs one of the 27 pillows behind your shoulders. Another adjusts your bed jacket, a quilted thing with sleeves like miniature dueling flags. Out the window, gas lights flicker on in the street, casting shadows across the wallpaper, a pale pink flocked pattern that was according to the household gossip, imported at shocking expense from France. A china figurine of a nymph stands eternally mid-curtsy on the mantel, and your dog, small, spoiled, and possibly named Pickle, circles 3 times before flopping directly onto your lap. Upright, of course, he too knows the rules. You reach for your bedside book, something boring enough to lull you toward slumber, but not so dull it makes you contemplate mortality. A medical treatise, perhaps? Or an etiquette guide? Or something delightfully ironic like the benefits of early morning hunting. Around you, the room begins to settle. The heavy curtains muffle street noise. The ticking of the long case clock grows rhythmic, soothing. Somewhere in the corridor, a maid sneezes into a linen handkerchief and murmurs an apology to no one. You shift slightly, adjusting the lace-trimmed pillow behind your back, and try not to think about the fact that your bed is more vertical than a recliner at a suspiciously cheap massage parlor. It's fine, you're used to this. In fact, you prefer it. Lying completely flat? That's for the poor. Or the recently deceased. Your mind wanders to earlier in the evening. That little argument over port wine. The opera singer who may or may not have winked at your cousin. And whether or not the doctor was serious when he mentioned that a horizontal heart draws illness like a sponge draws ink. You suppress a chuckle. He did say that. Almost poetic, if morbid. But this is the Georgian era where mortality is close. Makeup is thick, and your sleep posture might say more about you than your birth certificate. You close your eyes. Upright, cushioned, and very gently compressed by a linen night wrapper. And tomorrow? Tomorrow you'll wake up with a crick in your neck, a vague sense of superiority, and the mild satisfaction of having survived another night in the proper position. You don't so much descend into sleep as you hover on its edge, your spine braced against cushions and your knees slightly bent under the embroidered counterpane. The stillness of the room is broken only by the occasional creak from the canopy, frame above you, and the faint, ever-present ticking of the long case clock in the hallway, an ancestral timepiece that's been counting sheep since before sheep were fashionable. Eventually, morning comes, not with the blinding burst of sunlight, because of course the heavy curtains block that, but with a quiet knock at the chamber door. Your maid, whose entire life revolves around the question, "Is Madam ready for her morning water?" enters bearing a silver basin of tepid rose-scented rinse. You sit up well, further up, and brace yourself to begin the slow process of emerging from bed. A bed, mind you, that required more furniture than the average peasant owned in a lifetime. You don't just hop out of a Georgian bed. That would be scandalous. No, you disembark, like a duchess from a coach. First, the dog is moved. Then the shawl is removed. Then one foot is guided down to the embroidered footstool, then the other, and then, balancing like a newborn foal, you rise to greet the day. But let's go back a bit, because now that you've gotten your first taste of upright aristocratic slumber, you're probably wondering, what in powdered heaven possessed them to design these absurd feathered altars in the first place? To answer that, we have to zoom out and look at the architecture of the Georgian bed itself. These were not beds in the modern sense. These were status displays, enclosures, personal theaters for the act of repose. You glance at yours again. It's enormous. Nearly 6 feet high and crowned with a baldachin that's a fancy word for a ceiling canopy. The posts are carved in a Rococo style that seems to imply cherubs were heavily involved in the design phase. Draperies, sometimes silk, sometimes velvet, hang down from the top frame and tie back with golden cords like curtains on a stage where your sleep is the evening performance. Historians still argue whether the size and ornamentation of these beds were more about comfort or class. Some say they were meant to trap heat in those frigid stone manor houses. Others claim it was simply a matter of display if your guests could see your bed and not audibly gasp, "Were you even trying?" You think about that as you recall a friend's bed down the lane, rumored to be upholstered in crimson damask and trimmed with tassels imported from Venice. Yours, naturally, is subtler, a tasteful golden cream with embroidered pineapples. Yes, pineapples. A symbol of hospitality in Georgian England, and also a reminder that someone in your family once overpaid wildly for imported fruit. But it's not just the scale. It's the absurd ritual involved. Before you even get to the bed, a sequence of servants has passed through to warm the sheets with hot bricks, puff the bolsters, and air out the nightcap drawer. Your linens were embroidered by someone who had opinions about the density of thread counts, and your mattress was flipped on a schedule that rivals naval logistics. By the time you settle into bed each night, you're surrounded by more fabric than a small haberdashery, and once you're in it, there's almost no moving. Not unless you want to dislodge the delicate arrangement of pillows and your own composure. Still, you try to imagine what it must have felt like in winter when the Fire dies out by midnight, and the frost paints fern-like curls on the inside of the window panes. Upright might not be comfortable, but it might be warm, especially with your feet buried under layers of quilts, fur throws, and the small but helpful weight of your dog Pickle, who still insists on sleeping like a croissant. And let's not forget the staircase. Not to get to the bedroom, but to get into the bed. If you're short, or simply wary of climbing into things, a bed that stands 3 feet off the ground poses certain challenges. So there it is at the foot, a carved lacquered step stool, perhaps with matching upholstery, perhaps embroidered with your initials or some light moral advice like rise pure, sleep humble. Some aristocrats even had small rope ladders attached to the bed frame. Others used what's called a bedstep commode, which surprise doubled as a chamber pot. Because nothing says elegance like hiding your toilet in your stairs. Now, if you're thinking this all sounds like a bit much, you're absolutely right. Still, the Georgian elite didn't see their bed as merely a place to sleep. It was where they received morning visitors in full brocade dressing gowns, read letters aloud with affected sighs, and even posed for painted portraits. To be seen upright in bed was not just acceptable, it was desirable. The faint suggestion of frailty, paired with impeccable posture, whispered to guests, "I may be delicate, but I am still vastly more important than you." So when you finally descend from the clouds each morning, perhaps with help, you don't just shake off sleep. You dismount a personal stage. You emerge from a sanctuary lined in stitched metaphors. And as your maid lays out your day clothes, you spare one last look at the mountain of bolsters you left behind. Slightly lumpy, over-perfumed, and somehow already being fluffed again. You're barely awake, still brushing off the ghost of a dream about velvet curtains chasing you through a hedgerow maze when your physician arrives uninvited. Of course he does. It's the Georgian era, and nothing says good morning like unsolicited medical advice offered with full confidence and no measurable data. He steps in, powdered wig slightly askew, breath reeking faintly of clove oil and self-importance. He greets you with a bow and without preamble begins to lecture again on the dangers of lying flat in bed. You nod politely. This is not your first encounter with the doctrine of the upright sleeper. "Madam," he says, voice low and urgent. A horizontal position encouraged the accumulation of phlegmatic humors. The lungs, those delicate sacs, collapse. The stomach wanders. The blood, dear lady, rises to the head. Catastrophic. You blink, still half dreaming, but the message is clear. Lie flat, and you might not wake up. Historians still argue whether this was sincere medical conviction or elaborate Georgian fear-mongering, but what's certain is that people in this era believed deeply in bodily humors, and perhaps more disturbingly, in their doctors' vibe-based diagnoses. The upright sleeping posture was prescribed like a miracle drug for everything from indigestion to melancholia, not to mention the ever-looming threat of dampening the organs. This, of course, was all happening in a world where bathing, too, frequently was considered dangerous, bloodletting was routine, and leeches were basically family pets. So in that context, propping yourself up on a pillow mountain all night? Reasonable. Even clever. You sip your morning infusion, a lukewarm blend of valerian root and something that tastes like furniture polish, while your physician recommends a goose feather neck brace. He calls it preventative. You call it a recipe for divorce. You make a mental note to check on Lady Pembleton next door. Rumor has it she attempted to sleep horizontally last week and woke up convinced she was Napoleon. Still, you try to imagine their logic. If blood really does rise to the head when you lie down, then sleeping upright must keep your thoughts grounded, anchored somewhere safe, like your shoulders or elbows. No wonder everyone's so invested in angle management. Some physicians even advocated for what they called a midnight tilt, a slight incline of no more than 15 degrees, adjusted precisely after supper but before the final prayers. This ensured optimal humoral drainage, a term you pretend to understand but privately suspect is just Victorian for "we made this up." The obsession with upright sleep wasn't limited to illness prevention either. It extended to morality. Uprightness, in the most literal sense, became a metaphor for moral strength. To sprawl in bed like a carefree dog was undignified, lazy, vaguely French. To perch stiffly among pillows? That was English virtue embodied, which is rich, considering most of the aristocracy was drinking wine for breakfast and wearing makeup made of lead. But let's not judge too harshly. After all, you're here in the middle of it, trying to navigate a world where every aspect of your health is filtered through a lens of balance between hot and cold, wet and dry, effort and leisure. You think back to the shelves in your dressing room. Dozens of little bottles labeled tincture of poppy, syrup of violets, essence of treacle. All of them promising rest, vitality, or at the very least, an evening of gently hallucinating through a poetry reading. But none of them ever claim what? The physician insists today's vertical sleeping posture will give you purity of breath, clarity of blood, and elegance of digestion. You nod again, politely, as he bows once more and exits, leaving behind only the faint scent of mothballs and misplaced confidence. You're tempted to lie down just to spite him. But no, that would be medically reckless and deeply unfashionable. Instead, you arrange your breakfast tray on a small lap table, an invention designed specifically for upright dining in bed. Toast, a soft egg, a very pale tea, nothing too heavy. Wouldn't want your stomach to sink, as the physician warned. And as you sit there propped, laced, and now vaguely anxious about your internal fluids, you remember that there's an entire economy built around this posture. Pillow makers, backboard designers, herbalists who promise better balance with every puff of lavender-infused linen spray. Even poets get involved writing sonnets about upright repose and comparing good posture to nobility of soul. You once received a letter from a suitor praising the angle at which your head tilted while dozing through a harpsichord recital. He called it divinely geometric. You called it desperately trying not to snore. You glance out the window and spot a servant hanging fresh linens to dry, each one stiff as parchment, starched to stand on its own. You wonder if the sheets also believe in upright morality. Eventually, it's time for your morning walk 3 circuits around the rose garden and a polite nod to the goose that thinks it's in charge. But tonight, you'll return to that bed. And once again, you'll prop yourself into medically approved perfection. Because in this house and this era, sleep is not an act of surrender. It is an act of control. Later that evening, after the sun has sunk behind the hedgerows and the house smells faintly of roast game and spent beeswax, you prepare to ascend once more to your upright throne of rest. But as your maid arranges the pillows with the meticulousness of an army engineer, you start to notice something odd. There's pride in it. Not just the arrangement itself, no, that's understandable, but in the angle, in the sheer height of the stack. One of the bolster pillows is embroidered with your initials. Another has a delicate loop of lace that serves absolutely no purpose. And as the final layer is fluffed into place, you realize you're about to sleep at an angle that wouldn't look out of place in a museum display titled "Woman Being Gently Launched into the Moon." But you don't question it. Because here's the secret. Georgian aristocrats didn't just believe sleeping upright was healthier, they believed it was classier. Lying flat? That's what poor people did. People who worked in fields, or carried coal, or heaven forbid shared beds with more than one person. Upright sleep was luxurious. It was the physical embodiment of being too important to sprawl. You perch on the edge of your mattress, eyeing the incline. This is not comfort. This is performance. And you know it, across town. Lord Pembroke is said to have commissioned a custom bed with an adjustable backboard so he could sleep like a Grecian statue. A week later, Lady Windermere claimed to sleep at precisely 32 degrees, which somehow became the new trend. Not because it was better, because it was harder. Historians still argue whether this was driven by medical theories, social expectations, or just good old-fashioned one-upmanship. But in practice, the wealthier the sleeper, the more dramatic the incline. You're not sleeping, you're reclining in triumph. And it's not just the angle. It's the accoutrements. You lift your feet onto a fur-lined foot cushion. Not because it's cold, but because cold feet are for people without ancestral titles. You adjust the ribbon on your bed cap pale blue tonight to match the linen undersheet that no one will see but you, your maid, and the occasional judgmental ghost. Then there's the quilt. Not just any quilt, an heirloom stitched from Indian chintz and handed down by an aunt who once claimed to have had dinner with Voltaire. It weighs almost as much as your last dowry payment and smells faintly of rosewater and forgotten secrets. You begin your nightly. Climb that first step onto the little stool. Second step, a gentle hoist up to the mattress, which creaks under the weight of expectation. Then a delicate shuffle to wedge yourself into the right spot. The one where your spine isn't quite straight, but also not unruly. The maid makes one last adjustment to the lace curtain on the side of the bed. Not the canopy. No, that's already closed. This is a side valance. Purely decorative. Possibly cursed. You settle in. Upright, majestic, and vaguely sore. From the hallway, you can hear the faint echo of another guest laughing. Probably someone who's already drunk too much brandy and is planning to sleep horizontally. The audacity. You imagine the local doctor pacing in his study, muttering about pleurisy and intestinal shift. You smile. You're better than that. You've got posture. You glance at the small table beside your bed. A carafe of water, filtered through linen, a volume of poetry, unreadable, and a small bell with a silver handle for summoning assistance in the night. Not because you need help, just in case you feel dramatic. Above you, the bed's canopy stretches out like a tent fit for royalty, which, you remind yourself with sleepy satisfaction, is exactly the point. You think back to a particularly competitive evening some weeks ago. A dinner guest had bragged that her bed required 2 footstools to enter. You had smiled, nodded, and commissioned a 3rd stool the next morning, not because you needed it, but because no one needs 3 footstools. That's why it works. The Georgian obsession with upright sleep became, somehow, a form of aristocratic arms race. Not with guns, but with pillows, height, layers, ornamentation. You weren't just resting, you were rising, and rising. As it turns out, was a very big deal. You sigh, repositioning slightly to avoid a decorative button that's pressing into your shoulder blade. Somewhere out there, someone is sleeping on a straw mattress and dreaming of comfort. You, meanwhile, are living the dream, provided that dream involves maintaining spinal tension until dawn and possibly developing mild vertigo. The candles flicker. The fire has turned to embers. Pickle snores gently from his place at the foot of the bed, wrapped in a hand-knit dog shawl that cost more than your cousin's horse. And you? You are upright, not because it's comfortable, not because it's practical, but because it is, simply, what people like you do. You wake up with a neck that feels like it's been in a polite duel with a butter churn, and a faint sense of superiority that you can't quite place until you remember. Ah, yes, you slept upright again. Well done, another triumph of class over comfort. But it wasn't just about looking important while unconscious. No, your neck pain has a deeper cultural root. Georgian society had a particular fear, wrinkles. Specifically, sleep wrinkles. Not the ones earned from stress or sun, but the terrifying, permanent creases that might appear from pressing one's cheek too carelessly into a pillow. To lie flat was not only unhealthy, it was aging. And so, entire nightly routines were designed around preserving the delicate illusion of eternal smoothness. You glance at your vanity and see the tools of the trade. Goose fat balm, elderflower tonic, powdered pearl. Everything designed to keep your face as porcelain perfect as your tea set. Historians still debate whether upright sleeping was truly effective in the war on wrinkles, or whether it was just another theatrical part of a nightly self-care routine that doubled as a performance for your lady's maid. But by now, you've learned that Georgian health advice often wavered somewhere between earnest nonsense and deeply held superstition. You recall Lady Dalrymple's obsession with not disturbing the blood. She swore by a pillow wedge that kept her head tilted at precisely 11 degrees, lest the pooling of internal fluids turn her morning complexion sallow. You always suspected she just liked the way her bed looked like a chaise for Cleopatra. And then there were the wigs. Ah yes, the elephant-sized issue in the bed. The powdered wig. For the well-heeled Georgian sleeper, removing your wig at night was not always an option, especially if you had guests or were receiving private correspondence before breakfast. But sleeping with a wig on? That required strategy. Pillows were positioned to accommodate the towering architecture. Some women even wore wig caps to keep their curls crisp. Others, more daring, more fashion-forward, simply slept at the edge of the bed with their heads tilted back like artfully arranged mannequins in a wax museum. You once tried it yourself. The crick in your neck lasted a week, but your hair looked spectacular. Priorities. Of course, not everyone played by these rules. Some brave souls removed their wigs entirely and wore elaborate nightcaps embroidered, beribboned, sometimes bejeweled contraptions that would make a Renaissance pope blush. Nightcaps served two purposes: keeping the head warm. Georgian insulation was mostly decorative and preventing one's natural hair from doing anything. Unruly. Because heaven forbid someone see your real hair in the morning. You reach up now and adjust your own nightcap. It's a pale lavender satin with a tassel on top that bounces gently with every movement. Completely ridiculous. Deeply essential. You look around your room as the fire is being rekindled. The embers from last night are stirred back to life by your maid with the delicacy of someone who's well aware that she's being silently judged, not by you, by the walls. The walls, by the way, are covered in fabric. Not wallpaper. Fabric. Stretched damask or chintz. Sometimes hand-painted, always subtly fading in places where sunlight slips through the curtains. It muffles sound, yes, but it also traps scents. That lingering aroma of lavender, beeswax, and powdered skin? That's not just the air. It's the walls themselves, holding the memory of every night's preparations. You wonder, vaguely, if your ancestors' room smelled the same. If Lady Eleanor, with her famously narrow waist and suspiciously wide eyes, also slept upright. Probably. The family portrait suggests as much. She's seated stiffly in her painting, half reclining in a bed with an alarming number of doilies. You suspect she's actually just trying not to wrinkle her forehead. Still, these aren't simply quirks of a forgotten time. They're part of an entire system of sleep performance, where posture is politics and elegance is a bedtime sport. Remember the physician from the other day? He mentioned something called facial conservation. The idea that by minimizing the surface contact of your face with anything, including life, you could delay aging indefinitely. This idea was so popular, some noblewomen were rumored to sleep wearing a frame. Yes, a literal face frame, like a tiny velvet hammock, suspended above their cheeks. Imagine drifting off with a tiny hat rack propped delicately over your nose. Now imagine doing that on purpose, and you did it once. Just to see. The result? No wrinkles. Also no sleep. You gave up before midnight and swore off all devices that involved screws, straps, or velvet over your mouth. But not everyone gave up. There was once a nobleman Lord Everleigh, who had a brass contraption built into his headboard to keep his chin from succumbing to gravity. He died during a nap, not from the device. From smugness, probably. And now, here you are, reclining. At your approved angle, nightcap secured, face freshly smeared with balm made from crushed rose hips and high-quality denial. All in service of a tradition that believes sleep is not so much about rest as it is about maintenance. Your candle flickers. You adjust your lace cuff. You pet the sleeping Pickle, who's managed to roll into a position that looks disturbingly more comfortable than yours. But at least you'll wake tomorrow with your skin unsullied, your posture pristine, and your social status intact, even if your neck protests all the way to breakfast. You know, for a society that prized elegance and restraint, the Georgian bedtime wardrobe was allowed. You start your evening routine surrounded by mountains of them. Night clothes aren't simply for comfort or warmth. No, they're architectural. Strategic. Worn not to sleep well, but to sleep correctly, which in this case means looking like a very drowsy opera singer wrapped in lace and virtue. First, the underlayers. A linen shift, long and modest, stiff at the collar, and somehow always slightly itchy despite being washed in lavender water and good intentions. It clings in places you wish it wouldn't, sags in others, and smells faintly of starch and family obligation. Over that, you'll step into a bed jacket quilted, padded, embroidered with roses or something vaguely moral like doves or lilac. It ties at the front, of course, with ribbons that have no practical purpose, but take a maid 3 minutes each to get. Symmetrical. Then come the optional layers, the sleeve protectors to keep the lace crisp, the hand covers for delicate fingers, prone to chapping, and the sleeping stays a looser, softer version of a corset that still manages to whisper, "Don't get too comfortable." Historians still argue whether these night garments were ever meant to be slept in properly, or whether they existed mainly so women could be seen in them for precisely 10 minutes before extinguishing the candles. Either way, once you're dressed for bed, you look less like someone about to drift into slumber and more like someone halfway through preparing for an unusually cozy duel. And men aren't exempt, of course. Your brother's wardrobe includes a ruffled nightshirt with embroidered cuffs, a long brocade dressing gown with dragons on the hem, and a nightcap so floppy it could double as a windsock. There's even a rumor that he commissioned silk slippers stitched with his initials, in case the footman sees him sleepwalking. It's all absurd, lavish, glorious, and well, completely impractical for the actual business of sleeping. Once, just once, you tried sleeping in nothing but a thin chemise. The scandal in your own mind kept you awake till dawn. You wrapped yourself in a blanket of guilt and vowed never to abandon your sleeve protectors again. And yet, there's something ritualistic about it all. The brushing of hair 100 strokes, precisely. The pinning of stray locks. The application of cold cream with a porcelain spatula so your fingers don't smudge your cheeks. The careful folding of day clothes and the ceremonial placing of slippers at a 45-degree angle from the bed. It's all designed to slow you down, to make sleep something earned, not tumbled into, like a child collapsing after too much play. No, you prepare for sleep, you approach it. You respect it. And sleep, in turn, responds by being just slightly elusive. Tonight, as you finish tying your last ribbon and pat the embroidered dove stitched onto your collarbone, you wonder if Georgian nightwear was ever about function, or if it was just another expression of a society obsessed with appearances, even in the dark. You think back to your cousin Eleanor's wedding trousseau. She received 12 different nightgowns, each for a different emotional state. There was one for melancholy contemplation, one for seasonal change, and a particularly unfortunate one for the third Wednesday of each month. You inherited one once. A sheer lace confection trimmed in bobbin fringe that made you look like an especially fragile table lamp, but you wore it anyway. Because in this world, to sleep is to perform. And it's not just the clothes, it's the fabrics themselves. Georgian society had a hierarchy of sleep textiles so elaborate it could be taught at court. Linen was the baseline breathable, easy to launder, slightly scratchy if made in a hurry. Cotton was rising in popularity, but still seen as a bit exotic, unless imported from India, in which case it was suddenly both scandalous and extremely fashionable. Silk was reserved for special occasions, or particularly long illnesses. Wool flannel was common in winter, though you had to balance warmth with the very real risk of frizzing your hair against your pillow. You personally favor a high thread count cambric, lightly perfumed with bergamot and folded into a rectangle, so sharp it could slice through a duchess's vanity. And the irony? After all that dressing, prepping, pinning, and powdering, you don't actually move once you're in bed, because adjusting your posture while wearing a quilted night jacket and lace-edged mittens is like wrestling a politely scented octopus dot so you lie still. Upright, of course, dignified, layered. It's like being wrapped in an onion of linen, lace, and societal expectation. Pickle, meanwhile, has fallen asleep in a pile of your discarded sleeve covers. He snores softly and twitches occasionally, possibly dreaming of a world where beds are just for lying down in. You smile. A small one. You don't want to wrinkle your cheek dot, and then you slowly lean back into your mound of pillows, careful not to disturb the ribbons. Sleep may come dot eventually dot, and when it does, you'll be ready dressed like a heroine in a sentimental play, upright like a noble statue, and fully prepared to greet any surprise visitor with the phrase, "Oh, I wasn't sleeping. I was simply meditating on cloud symmetry." You stir, sometime past midnight, not from a dream, but from a deeper instinct, an ancient, unspoken understanding shared by all Georgian aristocrats. The air is terrible. You blink, inhale through your nose, and immediately regret it. The scent is layered. Beneath the lavender sachets and faint hint of rose water lies something much more assertive: smoke, damp fabric. Maybe even a hint of boiled cabbage from dinner 6 hours ago. The perfume of the elite, you suppose. Because here's the truth, no one embroidered on the linen napkins. Georgian bedrooms were not bastions of freshness. Windows were rarely opened, especially in winter. The cold was thought to weaken the constitution, and some believed that night air unfiltered by curtain or lace could bring about sudden death. Bad airs, they called them, as though sleep itself could catch a chill and never recover. So everything stays shut. The thick brocade drapes pulled tight. The carved shutters behind the glass closed and latched. The fire smoldering, possibly out. And thus, you sleep in a richly furnished box that smells faintly of toast, mothballs, and inherited mildew. Historians still argue whether these rooms were truly worse than the smoky hovels of the working class, or simply differently bad. But aristocratic bedrooms had their own ambience. Your bed alone contributes more to the atmosphere than you'd care to admit. The heavy canopy traps warmth, yes, but also breath, perfume, and the subtle exhalations of Pickle, who is now tucked into the crook of your knees like a particularly judgmental pastry, and the chamber pot. Let's not forget the silent, ever-present guardian at the foot of the bed, housed within a discreet cabinet, disguised as a stool or side table. The chamber pot adds its own nuance to the room's scent profile. It's not offensive per se, just there. A quiet reminder that even powdered elegance must occasionally Face the realities of plumbing or lack thereof. You shift slightly, fanning your collar. Your quilted night jacket is suddenly too warm, but taking it off would require movement. And movement risks creasing, so you lie there, perspiring faintly. Eyes open. Then comes the coal smoke. Not from your fire, it's nearly out, but from somewhere downstairs. Likely the scullery or kitchen hearth, where a sleepy footman forgot to adjust the flue. The smell curls up through the floorboards, dense, chalky dry. It mingles with the sweet decay of potpourri and the subtle ghost of last week's pear tart. The result? A scent you might call November in a drawer. You recall the advice of the apothecary. Place orange peels on the hearth to sweeten the air. You tried that once. It burned. The room smelled like scorched citrus and disappointment for 3 days. And yet, somehow, you adapt. Your body has learned. This air, your lungs have signed the treaty. You no longer cough at the first whiff of coal or wrinkle your nose at Pickle's less noble emissions. Instead, you breathe shallowly, with the serenity of someone who knows that opening a window is more scandalous than skipping church. It's strange, this resistance to fresh air, especially considering that your daytime activities include promenading in gardens and praising the bracing country wind. But at night is different. Night belongs to the indoor elements, the warm tiles, the toasted feet, the candle smoke rising like a sleepy halo above your head, and that's assuming the candle hasn't already been snuffed. You remember, once, years ago, blowing out your bedside taper and then realizing with a creeping dread that the air had gone utterly still. No breeze, no flicker. Just the oppressive softness of trapped heat and velvet dust. That night, you dreamt of suffocating inside a cravat. Still, not all smells are unpleasant. Some are simply rich. The lingering hint of beeswax polish from your writing desk. The faint sweetness of your linen sheets, pressed with starch and optimism. Even the scent of your own skin, perfumed nightly with a touch of violet water, warmed now by the heat of layered covers and cautious repose. Pickle shifts, exhaling a tiny wheeze of dog breath into the blankets. You pat his head with 2 fingers. Gently. No sudden movements. Wrinkles, remember? Somewhere beyond the drapes, the wind brushes against the outer shutters. But inside, the room is sealed tight, like a velvet-lined tomb. Only slightly more expensive. You wonder just for a moment what it might be like to sleep in a cottage. One with drafty shutters and open beams and air that actually moves. What scandal? What freedom? What absurd discomfort? No. You dismiss the thought. You are a person of means, and means come with consequences. Chief among them, air that smells like tradition and cannot, under any circumstances, be improved. You pull the covers up to your chest and settle once more into your familiar posture. Upright, proper, breathing shallowly through your nose and pretending the room smells. Like a summer orchard. It doesn't. It smells like heritage and roast goose, but you sleep anyway, because that's what nobility does. By morning, the smell of roast goose has thankfully faded, replaced by the gentler aromas of beeswax, warm linen, and a breakfast tray waiting somewhere beyond the drapes. But before you even think of putting foot to floor, you're reminded, once again, of a peculiar truth. You were never truly alone. Not even in your own bed. Oh, not in the ghostly sense, though that's coming, but in the very literal, very human sense. Because privacy in the Georgian aristocratic world was a rare and suspicious luxury. You stir quietly, opening one eye just enough to see movement by the hearth. It's your lady's maid, of course. She's already tidying the edges of your knit stand, adjusting the wick on the taper candle, and rearranging the bouquet of dried lavender as if it has offended her. She's been in the room since before. You opened your eyes, likely entered just after dawn, armed with a coal scuttle and the quiet dignity of someone who's seen far too much lace in her lifetime. You don't speak, not because you don't want to, but because it's understood. There's a ritual here. She doesn't acknowledge that she saw you drooling slightly in your sleep, and you don't acknowledge that she definitely witnessed you dreaming with your nightcap halfway off, and one sleeve rolled up like a drunken poet. Because that's the arrangement. Servants see everything, but nothing is ever seen. Historians still argue whether the complete lack of privacy in aristocratic households helped maintain order or just made everyone exquisitely tense. But one thing's certain, you were never truly unobserved. Even now, as you shift upright in bed, a footman knocks gently on the door to ask if he may enter with your breakfast tray. He knows the answer is yes. It's always yes. The knock is just ceremonial. Like most things in your life, in comes the tray. Porridge, tea, a perfectly boiled egg, and 3 slices of toast so delicately brown they could be used for architectural. Drafting you accept it with a nod, and he backs out of the room with all the reverence of someone reversing away from a monarch. You admire that then there's the bed itself, its openness, its theater. Unlike modern bedrooms, which are deeply private, personal spaces, Georgian sleeping quarters were designed to be seen. The more ornate the bed, the more public its intention. You think of Lady Wilbraham, who once held morning audiences in her bedchamber. Fully upright, propped on silken bolsters, she would receive callers like a queen, discussing correspondence and court gossip while sipping tea with her gloves still on. Her maid stood just out of frame, holding a vinaigrette bottle. In case someone swooned, you tried it once. Hosted a breakfast reading of a particularly racy sonnet collection. It went well until someone spilled jam on the coverlet, and the scandal lasted longer than the poem. Then again, you were always a bit more private than most. Still, even your most secluded moments are shared. There's the maid who tidies your garments while you sleep. The valet who checks the coals in your fireplace before bed. The laundress who scrubs your embroidered pillowcases, muttering under her breath about rose oil stains and mysterious chocolate smudges. Your entire nightly routine is not yours alone. It is observed, participated in, recorded in the quiet way of household staff who are professionally invisible, and you pretend not to mind, because this is just how it is. An aristocrat never truly belongs to herself. She belongs to the house, to the rhythm of the servants' footsteps, to the rustle of gowns and the hush of slippers on polished wood. You once heard of a nobleman who tried to live alone, dismissed his entire household, cooked his own eggs, tied his own cravat. They found him 2 weeks later, curled up in a dressing gown, muttering about how the teacups don't warm themselves. Privacy, it turns out, is exhausting. So you sit upright in your bed, sipping tea, while your maid brings your stockings to warm near the hearth. You say nothing. She says nothing. Yet everything is communicated. And if, later today, you decide to take a nap in the afternoon room, she will already know the proper angle of the chaise longue, the type of cushion your shoulder prefers, and how to position the curtains so the sunlight falls just so across your cheek, but never directly on your eyes, because she's always known. The house always knows. And if tonight you feel a bit more alone or not alone enough, you might find yourself wondering if that subtle creak in the hallway was the footman or someone else. Yes, you've heard the rumors. The servant who fell down the narrow stairs, the one who still rearranges the bed curtains in the dead of night, or the governess who vanished one Christmas Eve and now opens the window just a crack, just enough to let in the cold and the questions. You shiver slightly. Pickle lifts his head and blinks, but no, there's no ghost. Only the sound of a tray being cleared, a bed being fluffed, a door closing quietly in the distance. And so you pull your shawl tighter, glance once more around the room that never stops watching you, and remind yourself, Privacy is for people with nothing to hide. You, however, have everything to maintain. It's some time past tea, and you're strolling languidly through the long hallway back to your room. When you hear it again, the soft hiss of a fire just extinguished, the rustle of drapes being adjusted. You turn the corner and step into your chamber just in time to see your maid pulling the bed curtains shut with the practiced ease of someone who's done this every evening of your life. And as always, there's that brief flicker of awareness. This bed could kill you, not in a dramatic way. It won't collapse or fling you through the floorboards. No, it will simply, softly smother you with elegance. You see, Georgian beds, particularly those favored by the aristocracy, were as much fashion statements as they were sleeping structures. And while they looked divine, they were constructed with materials and arrangements that would send any modern fire marshal into hysterics. Let's start with the draperies. 4 thick, embroidered panels, one for each side of the bed, designed to keep out drafts and preserve warmth. Lovely. Practical, except that they were often treated with oils to repel moths and sweeten the sleep air. The result? Extremely flammable curtains. You, wrapped in a quilted dressing jacket, surrounded by flammable silk, with a candle flickering gently on your bedside table. What could possibly go wrong? Historians still argue whether fire was truly a common hazard or simply an overblown anecdotal fear passed down from one anxious dowager to the next. But you've heard the stories. The Earl's cousin who rolled over too close to his chamber stick. The lady who lit her hair ribbons on fire, reaching for a bedtime peppermint. You once found a scorch mark on the edge of your own canopy. It was blamed on a rogue spark. You never quite bought that explanation. Then there's the matter of candles. Your bedroom has 5 each mounted on something ornamental and deeply unstable. One sits atop your writing desk. It's base-shaped, like a swan in mid-squawk. Another rests on the bedside table near a stack of letters and a very flammable book of French poetry. They're lovely. They're romantic. They're also open flames surrounded by fabric. You always meant to switch to oil lamps. But then your cousin Celeste claimed they caused her migraines. And really, what's a little fire risk between friends? Still, you take precautions. Your nightcap has a small lace veil, partially decorative, partially an insurance policy. You blow out your bedside candle with practiced care, watching the wick glow red before fading to black. The room sinks into a dim hush. Only the fire remains, crackling softly. You've heard of some houses using a bed curtain snuffer, a long metal rod with a curved hook at the end, designed to close drapes from a distance. You once tried one. Nearly knocked your candlestick over in the process. Now you let the maid do it. She's better at it. Less flammable, and it's not just the fire. The canopy itself, while beautiful, looms above your head like a suspended fortress. It's heavy, made of thick wood and layered fabric. You once had a dream it fell on you in the night slowly like a velvet avalanche. You woke up with your heart pounding and refused to sleep under it for a week. The household was scandalized. You claimed an artistic whim. They never questioned it again. Pickle, of course, is blissfully unaware. He's curled at the base of your feet, tucked inside the folds of your counterpane like a furry pastry. Should the bed ever collapse, he will be the first to escape. He has instincts. You admire that about him. You pull the covers up and adjust your bolsters. A little to the left. There. Upright. Regal. Slightly anxious. Sometimes, you wonder whether your ancestors designed these beds purely to make it look like you were always on the verge of sitting up to make a profound declaration. Perhaps that's the point. There's a comfort in the familiar discomfort. The precise folds, the gentle weight, the calculated distance between you and the open flame. You've come to love the ritual danger. It's what separates the gentry from the merely wealthy. No one in your class simply goes to sleep. One must descend into slumber, delicately, fashionably, potentially inflammably. You fluff the pillow behind your neck embroidered with tiny birds in flight and glance once more at the bedside table. There's a taper you forgot to extinguish. You reach for it carefully, exhaling like a bellows. Darkness. And then the silence settles around you like the bed curtains. Complete, decorative, slightly menacing. This bed, with all its carvings and cushions and embroidered warnings, has held you for years. It's seen your dreams and fears and one awkward incident involving spilled elderflower cordial. It could kill you, yes, but it hasn't yet. And that, in Georgian logic, is practically affection. You close your eyes. Sleep comes not quickly, but with weight. Like a curtain drawn over your thoughts, the fire pops softly. The dog sighs. The canopy stays in place. Tonight, you live to sleep again. Sometime just before dawn, as the fire gives its last reluctant crackle and your eyelids flutter open for no particular reason, you hear it, the soft jingle of a bell from across the room. Not a loud, desperate alarm. No, this is a delicate chime one, designed to be heard only by those who are listening properly. You fumble under the covers, brush past the dog, and locate the small silver bell beside your bed. It rests on a porcelain dish shaped like a seashell. Of course it does. Everything in your bedroom has a theme, and tonight that theme is ocean. Whimsy meets sleep paralysis. You give it a gentle shake. Moments later, your maid appears. She doesn't knock. Why would she? You rang. Is everything to your liking, madam? She asks, not because she doesn't know the answer, but because. It is etiquette. You nod. You mention, with the utmost subtlety, that the corner pillow has begun to feel a touch rebellious. Without a word, she crosses the room and fluffs it back into obedience. There is comfort in the choreography of this exchange. In the Georgian era, calling for assistance during the night was not seen as indulgent, it was expected. A lady of standing was never truly out of reach. And so, bells became the gentle language of aristocratic midnight needs. Historians note that the placement of the bell varied depending on personality. Some favored a cord beside the bed, others a tap bell on the knit stand. You prefer your slightly out of reach an excuse, perhaps, to extend a single arm with dramatic flair, as if summoning a spirit, and it wasn't just pillows. Bells were. Rung for everything. Fresh water, an extra blanket, a missing bookmark, or sometimes simply for reassurance that someone was still awake and listening. The bell was your lifeline to a world that never truly slept. Of course, you had to ring it properly. No frantic jostling. No desperate clanging. This was not a tavern. There were rules. 1 ring. Assistance. 2. Water. 3 rings after midnight. That would earn you a polite but chilly reminder at breakfast that the staff requires rest. 2. You once heard of a baronet who rang his bell 13 times because he dreamed he'd been kidnapped by bandits and needed reassurance that his toes were still attached. The maid arrived. She checked. They were. He left her a shilling the next morning and called it a tactful inconvenience. But the bell wasn't your only tool. There were face cloths involved. 2. Yes, you have a set of nocturnal napkins. Small squares of linen meant for blotting the forehead, cushioning the cheek, or covering the eyes to discourage what your aunt once described as inappropriate dreaming. Some ladies use them to prevent wrinkles. Others to maintain modesty in case of sudden company, say, a servant bringing hot water, or a ghostly ancestor checking on her great-grandniece's posture. You've used them all your life. There's a pile neatly folded beside the bed, scented with elderflower and pressed to the thickness of ecclesiastical wafers. When you're particularly restless, you fold one into a triangle and place it gently over your nose and mouth. Not for any medicinal purpose, just tradition. And maybe a little drama. There's something deeply satisfying about the presence of small rituals. You think of Lady Templeton, who traveled with a personal night bell footman. His sole duty? To wait outside her chamber door in case she had a question, a discomfort, or a passing observation about the wallpaper. It sounds absurd now, but at the time, it made perfect sense. Sleep wasn't a passive act. It was a managed process, and you were the manager. The rules extended to how one called for aid. No shouting, no stomping, absolutely no clapping. Lord Cornwallis tried that once and was promptly ignored by his staff for an entire fortnight. No. The bell was your voice in the night. Sometimes you didn't even use it. Sometimes it was enough just to know it was there, shining faintly in the candlelight, a tiny beacon of reassurance that even in the velvet darkness, you had not been abandoned to your own devices. Tonight, as your maid withdraws once more into the silent parts of the house, you tuck the bell slightly closer to your side, just in case. Pickle snorts in agreement, then resettles, his ears twitching once at a creak from the hallway. You smooth the linen napkin over your cheek. You adjust your bolster by precisely half an inch. And you let yourself drift again, not just into sleep, but into that gentle confidence that should your pillow rebel or your shawl slip, help is but one graceful jingle away. Because here, in your upright bed, surrounded by layers of fabric, ritual and candlelight, you are never alone with your sleep. And that, more than any tonic or tincture, is what makes the Georgian night so oddly, extravagantly secure. By now, you're fully accustomed to the pageantry of Georgian sleep, every layer of lace, every medicinal puff of lavender, every pillow fluffed with the seriousness of an imperial decree. But even so, nothing quite prepares you for how deeply social it all is, because here's the thing no one outside the nobility quite realizes. Sleep was not private. It was performative. You don't simply fall asleep. You present it. You stage it, and most curiously of all, you talk about it. At length. This morning, over breakfast, Lady Midgen launched into a 15-minute monologue about her restless night, how her third bolster had betrayed her, how the fireplace made a whistling noise exactly like her late husband, how she feared her nightcap had shrunk in the wash, causing undue pressure on her forehead, and possibly her thoughts. Everyone listened, politely. Then Lady Agatha chimed in to share that she had awoken from a dream involving a swan and a tax collector, and that it must mean she was due for a letter from Bath. And nobody batted an eye, because in Georgian aristocratic society, sleep talk is part of the social ritual. Dreams, interruptions, strange noises, every detail is fair game. In fact, sharing the proper kind of nocturnal inconvenience is a subtle way of reinforcing one's status. Too peaceful a night, and people might assume you slept like a tradesman. Too troubled, and they might suspect your digestion's off. You find yourself caught in this strange cultural performance. You sip your tea, just the right shade of pale amber, and casually remark, "I dreamed I was floating through a room, lined entirely in tassels." The group nods approvingly. Lady Carrington leans forward and whispers, "That's a sign of upcoming correspondence, or excessive starch." Historians still argue whether this fixation on sleep etiquette came from boredom, spiritual anxiety, or simply having too many bed curtains and not enough problems. But it's clear that the Georgian elite treated sleep like another Ceylon topic to be dissected, embroidered, and occasionally exaggerated. There are rules, of course. Rule 1. Never admit to snoring. Snoring is the vocal equivalent of burping. In church, if you must address it, blame the dog, or the fireplace, or a passing goose. Rule 2. Posture is identity. Upright sleep suggests refinement. Side sleeping is considered rural. Full horizontal slumping? Best not discussed in polite company. You once overheard a footman say the Duke had sprawled. The Duchess refused to speak to him for 3 days. Rule 3. A good night's sleep is measured not by rest, but by drama. No one wants to hear, "I slept well." That's dull. What they want is narrative. The tossing, the eerie moonlight, the slight chill that suggested an ancestor's disapproval. That's what gets the attention at breakfast. You remember, with great clarity, the time you dozed through an entire night without once adjusting your shawl. You told no one. What was there to say? You awoke rested, whole, emotionally stable, unrelatabled, but the next night, you dreamed of falling into a vat of goose feathers while Lady Honoria laughed at your stockings. The next morning, everyone wanted details. You were briefly the most interesting person at the table. You glance around your drawing room and spot Lady Forsyth reclined faintly in her armchair, fanning herself as she recounts last night's linen incident. Her sheet monogrammed, Egyptian had apparently creased in such a way that she woke thinking she'd been branded. I said to myself, she drawls, "Lady Forsyth, you've been marked by fate." But no, just thread tension. The room laughs. You laugh. Because this is what aristocrats do. You dissect the night as though it were a poem. You imply meaning. You exchange knowing glances over barely remembered dreams. Sleep becomes literature. And you, dear listener, are its author. Even Pickle somehow gets included. Someone asks if he dreamed. You say yes, of course he barked once in his sleep and kicked violently at a cushion. Everyone agrees that he was likely chasing scandalous hares. You excuse yourself politely after the second pot of tea and return to your chamber. The bed has been remade. Pillows plumped. The napkins starched out. It looks exactly as it did the night before, like a miniature opera stage awaiting its diva. And tonight, you will return to it not as a tired person, but as a character, ready for Act 2 of your upright performance. Maybe there will be creaks. Maybe a stray breeze. Maybe the memory of that one tassel dream will drift back, and you'll wonder what it all meant. Or maybe you'll simply sleep. And if you do, well, you won't tell anyone, because a perfect sleep is a private treasure, and Georgian society, it's not particularly fond of private treasures. You're brushing your hair before bed, precisely 100 strokes, as custom dictates when you pause, staring into the mirror just a little longer than necessary, because you've heard the whispers. Everyone has died in the gentle hush of candlelit drawing rooms. Over half-eaten lemon tarts and porcelain teacups, someone always leans in and asks, "Do you believe in ghosts?" And in Georgian society, the answer is never a simple yes or no. It's more like only the polite ones. As you settle into your upright bed once more, you can't help but feel it, the weight of silence, the soft creaks of old wood, the chill that slips beneath even the finest eiderdown. This is a house that remembers. These are walls that listened out. It doesn't help that people keep dying in beds that look suspiciously like yours. Not violently, of course. That would be crass. But slowly, gently, upright. Like candles being snuffed out without ceremony. You've heard all the tales. The governess who vanished, leaving only a single slipper beneath the window seat. The uncle who swore a hand tugged his bed curtain nightly, only to discover it was always tied back the next morning. The footman who resigned after seeing a silhouette seated at the dressing table, brushing non-existent hair. Historians still debate how seriously Georgian aristocrats took ghosts, whether it was sincere belief or a particularly committed form of entertainment. But it's well documented that the upper classes adored a well-timed haunting, especially the romantic kind. You recall a story from Lady Eversley, her great-aunt Beatrice, who reportedly wandered the halls at night looking for her lost hair. ribbon, and occasionally rearranged the sugar bowls out of spite. Lady Eversley spoke of her with affection, like a slightly dramatic cousin who overstayed her welcome but always remembered your birthday. You snuggle deeper into your upright, nest and wonder not if your bed is haunted, but by whom you hope. If it's anyone, it's someone polite. Someone who understands the effort you put into these nightly arrangements. The lace-trimmed nightdress, the triple-stitched bolster, the lavender-dusted face-cloth folded into a lotus. Surely, any self-respecting specter would admire the symmetry. Pickle lifts his head, sniffs the air, and promptly yawns. You envy his confidence. Still, your eyes dart once, twice toward the heavy bed curtains. They're drawn tonight, not for warmth, but ambience. Draped just slightly ajar, as if you'll wake to find someone standing beyond them holding a silver tray and asking if you prefer gooseberry or fig jam with your regrets. There's a strange kind of comfort in it, though. Notion that your sleep might be observed, even from beyond the grave, fits neatly into the Georgian worldview. After all, you already sleep under the watchful eyes of portraiture, your grandmother in oils, glaring sternly from above the fireplace, her expression hovering somewhere between disapproval and flatulence. You once joked that if she really was haunting the room, she could at least refill your tea. No one laughed, not because the joke wasn't funny, but because, well, she just might. And then, of course, there are the dreams. Everyone has them. The ones where someone's watching, where a figure sits at the foot of the bed, perfectly still, face shadowed by an outdated bonnet. You always wake up with your heart fluttering, but never screaming. Ghosts, after all, are part of the furniture here. As expected as candlesticks or that one teacup that always tips slightly to the left, its tradition, you once heard a theory shared in hushed tones over syllabub that spirits linger in the folds of bed curtains, that every pleat, every embroidered tassel holds a memory, that to sleep in a bed with heavy fabric is to invite company. You considered replacing your drapes with something lighter. Muslin, perhaps, something breezy. Then Lady Templeton said, "But darling, what would the spirits cling to?" So the velvet stays, and tonight, as your candle flickers low and the silence settles like powdered sugar over the room, you feel it. Again, that presence. Not threatening. Not even particularly interested. Just nearby. Like an old aunt who knits judgmentally in the corner. You breathe slowly. Count backward from 50 and keep your posture regal. Because if you are being watched by the deceased, you might as well look good doing it. Pickle sighs and rolls over. Somewhere outside, a fox yelps once and goes silent. You adjust your shoulder shawl, just in case, and as your eyes drift closed, one final thought tiptoes through your mind. If your ancestors are still here, well, at least they're getting a front row seat to the most elegantly managed bedtime in the family. Morning again, this time slower. You wake not to the jingle of a bell or the creak of the maid's footstep, but to the distant sound of birds muffled behind velvet drapery and a room that smells faintly of warm linen and last night's peppermint. Lozenge, you don't rise immediately. That would suggest urgency, and Georgian mornings are never urgent. Instead, you adjust your spine delicately. Tilt your chin in that practiced angle of "I'm not awake, but I am aesthetically arranged," and allow your mind to wander to that lingering dream. The one with the floating harpsichord and a crowd of gentlemen bowing with spoons. You'll share it over breakfast. They'll love it. But for now, you remain in bed. Upright, of course. And you begin to notice something else, the light shifting behind the curtains. The distant tick of the long case clock in the hallway. The soft rustle of Pickle moving from your knees to your lap with the elegance of a cat who's just remembered he's a dog. It's in these quiet, creaseless moments that a curious sensation rises up, one that every Georgian aristocrat knows intimately. Call on melancholy. Not sadness, exactly. Nothing dramatic. No sobbing into ruffled pillowcases or penning tragic odes about lost gloves. No, this is something gentler, more poetic. A slow ache for the passage of time. A wistful awareness of fleeting things. The Japanese call it mono. No aware, but here in your Georgian world it's just Tuesday. Historians agree the 18th century was a golden age of quiet emotional collapse. Poets wept into their lemon water. Lords stared longingly at garden hedges. Women wrote essays about the emotional implications of frost. And nowhere did this delicate mood settle more deeply than in bed, especially a bed like yours, designed for propped-up reflection. You don't just sleep here, you dwell here. You ponder, you compose, you mourn seasons as they pass. You wonder if that dream about tassels had something to do with your unresolved feelings about autumn. You once read a sonnet about a candle that burned unevenly and felt personally attacked. This morning, the melancholy settles on you like an extra quilt. Heavy, embroidered, possibly monogrammed. You accept it with grace. You look toward your writing desk. A folded letter from your cousin sits waiting, unopened. You know it contains something tedious about her new embroidery pattern and a recipe for quince jelly, but still, the sight of her script makes you want to sigh deeply and compose a reply entirely in metaphors. You consider the weather. It rained last night. You know this not from looking outside, heavens no, but from the change in the room scent. Damp hearth. A slight mineral edge to the floorboards. The fireplace now emits the aroma of tired ash. Outside, the hedges are no doubt glistening, and the footpaths smell like wet leaves and suppressed regret. And yet, you remain in bed, because bed is the perfect place to feel things without consequence. You reach for your journal. A slim leather-bound thing with absurdly thin pages and a ribbon. Bookmark that you've somehow lost and rediscovered 14 times. You write a single line. The morning folds inward like an unused handkerchief. Perfect. You put the journal down and feel momentarily satisfied, and also slightly bereft. That's the trick with Georgian emotions. They always come bundled, like linen napkins and matching forks. No feeling is ever solitary. They arrive in pairs, elegantly. You recall your aunt once told you as you stared out a carriage window at a sheep standing quite still in the fog. Never trust a morning that doesn't break your heart a little. You were 9. You've never looked at sheep the same way since. Pickle, now fully rearranged, exhales dramatically as if to say, "Get on with it already." But you don't. Not yet. Because in this moment, you are one with your bed. Not just resting, but ruminating. Partaking in that most noble of Georgian pursuits, romanticized inactivity. You glance toward the window, still curtained, still rich with embroidered thistles. You don't open it. You wouldn't dream of it. The idea of letting actual air in here is almost vulgar. Besides, it would disturb the composition of the moment. So instead, you imagine the world outside. The faint drip of water from the eaves. The early gardener trimming a hedge with the resigned pace of someone pondering the futility of all living things. A cow somewhere sighing through its nose with spiritual gravity. You sip your tea lukewarm now, slightly metallic. Just the thing for introspection. And as the clock ticks toward whatever hour it pleases, you allow yourself the smallest of indulgences, a melancholy smile, because nothing, dear listener, is more Georgian than sitting upright in bed, bathed in filtered morning light, swaddled in brocade, and longing for something you can't quite name. You're still in bed, because where else would you be? When you hear the soft clinking of porcelain, a fresh tea tray arrives. A delicate knock. The door opens just enough for a hand to place it quietly on the side table, then closes again. Without a word, you're alone once more. Just you, Pickle, now fully wrapped in your shawl like an aristocratic burrito, and a new cup of something herbal that smells suspiciously like disappointment. You take a sip. Chamomile and something else. Is that lettuce? Yes, you recognize it. Your maid has prepared your sleep tea again, because tonight, like many nights before, you will be expected to manage your sleep with the same attention to detail as a diplomatic. Treaty. Welcome to the bizarre world of the Georgian sleep diet. A curious phrase, isn't it? But in your world, it makes perfect sense. For every aristocrat committed to upholding the standards of upright nocturnal elegance, there is a corresponding obsession with what you eat, drink, and inhale before bed. Historians agree that the 18th century marked the golden age of gentle paranoia. You don't just worry about your dreams, you worry about the ingredients that may cause them. And so, your evening routine includes not only face cream and hairpins, but a careful negotiation with your digestive system. Let's begin with the herbal tea. Tonight's blend is called the Soothing Infusion, though it could just as easily be labeled hot salad. It includes lettuce, fennel, poppy seed, and oddly a trace of clove. Your apothecary swears by it. He also sells tooth powder made from burnt bread, so you tried to keep your expectations low. You once had a cup of this infusion so strong you dreamed that your dressing table opened up and swallowed you. It took you an hour to look it in the mirror again without flinching. Still, you drink because the alternatives are worse. You remember the season when tomatoes were briefly considered a nightmare fruit. Supposedly, they stirred the humors and caused one to dream of clowns, arguments, and unfinished needlework. You gave them up for 3 months before discovering Lady Pemberton had made the whole thing up to justify her indigestion. On the other hand, beef pie is considered sleep supportive. Why? Because it's grounding. Heavy foods, you're told, keep you from floating off into agitated dreams. There is, in fact, an entire pamphlet in your library titled On the Digestive Virtues of Cold Meats Before Bed. The logic is questionable, but comforting. Other midnight-approved items include stewed prunes for regularity, warm milk with nutmeg for the nerves, and most puzzling of all, a thin slice of jellied eel served with buttered toast. Promotes stillness of the blood, they say. You tried it once. Promoted nausea instead. Still, every aristocrat has their own rules. Lady Quinton fasts after 6 and claims it keeps her dreams pure. Lord Withers insists on a small gram of cherry brandy to prevent night ghosts. Your cousin Eugenia eats 2 buttered crumpets every night, so her dreams have something to sit on. And you? You trust your tea. Sort of. You tried writing down what foods led to which dreams. The journal lasted 4 days before devolving into drawings of sleepy cows and one furious poem about undercooked pheasant. You push the tray slightly aside and glance at the ornate tin that holds your midnight nibbles. It's filled with sugared almonds and something ambiguous that once looked like fruit. You hesitate, then take one, because if you're going to stay upright, you might as well be slightly sweet while doing so. Pickle grunts. You look at him, half asleep with a crumb stuck to his nose, and realize that he doesn't have a sleep diet. He eats floor toast and dreams like a saint. No tea. No lectures. No fear of tomatoes. The injustice is staggering. Still, there's a comfort in the ritual. You finish your cup. You blot your lips with a monogrammed napkin. You reflect on the fact that everything you've consumed today has been somehow engineered to promote orderly slumber. Even your dinner, the delicate partridge, the mashed carrots with nutmeg, the bread that tastes like linen and obligation, was designed to lull the body into gentle stillness. You suspect this is why so many Georgian menus are less flavorful and more medically neutral. Tonight's supper conversation included a spirited debate on whether radishes incite fevered dreams. Lord Elston claimed they did. Lady Fry countered that only the round ones were guilty. No one reached a conclusion, but the radishes were ceremonially removed anyway. That's Georgian logic for you. When in doubt, eliminate vegetables. You shift in bed, resettling into your inclined position, and feel a small bubble of chamomile rising in your chest. You pat it down with a quiet apology to your stomach and begin composing tomorrow's breakfast complaint in your mind. Too hot, too bland, too scented, too morally conflicting. You'll find the phrasing later. For now, you pull the covers to your chest, arrange the pillows in their approved configuration, and allow the gentle effects of your carefully managed sleep cuisine to do its work. And as your mind floats between thoughts of radish conspiracies and buttery dreams, you marvel once again at this strange truth. In your world, even falling asleep requires a menu. You're drifting now, the kind of slow mental tumble that comes after tea, poetry, and an extended argument with a pillow that doesn't understand its place in the hierarchy. Your head dips a little too far forward. You jolt back upright, and once again, you ask yourself the age-old aristocratic bedtime question. Why are we doing this to ourselves? Why the rigid angle? The bolsters? The cricked neck and the slow, creeping suspicion that your spine is gradually being persuaded to evolve into a coat rack? The answer comes not from your maid or your doctor or even your ghostly great-aunt with her whispery commentary on curtain choice. No, the answer is in the stories, those shared at breakfast tables, murmured behind fans at card tables, and printed with breathless confidence in the pages of the Gentlewoman's Health Companion. Lying flat might kill you. You adjust your pillow once more, tucking it just behind the shoulder. Upright enough to satisfy the doctors. Comfortable enough not to cry. Probably. You remember the warnings vividly. Childhood bedtime tales weren't about wolves or witches. They were about blood, not in a gory way. In a gravity way. If you lie flat, your governess said, tightening your nightcap just a bit too enthusiastically, the blood rushes to the head. And what do you suppose happens then, darling? You had no idea. Neither did she. But the phrase stuck. The blood rushes to the head. That was all it took to instill a lifelong fear of horizontal rest. Historians still argue whether this idea was rooted in early anatomy studies, lingering medieval superstition, or simply the very Georgian tendency to turn ordinary things into polite threats. Whatever the origin, it worked. Even now, you know people who sleep at an incline of precisely 12 degrees because a physician once said it discouraged stagnation of the pee fluids. Others prefer a firmer angle, claiming it prevents brain seepage, a term so vaguely alarming you never questioned it. And then there's the theory about apoplexy. Favored among 18th century physicians, it suggests that lying down causes an internal pooling of humors, especially in the brain. This, they claimed, could result in sudden death, or worse, dreams about being French. You once read an account of a baron who died in bed during a particularly restful nap. His obituary blamed the horizontal posture rather than the two. Roast pheasants he'd eaten beforehand. Classic misdirection. Even the clergy got involved. Sermons occasionally warned against idleness in the posture of the dead. Lying flat was not just medically inadvisable, it was morally suggestive. The dead lay flat, the devout reclined. A subtle but important difference. You find yourself pondering this now, still snug between your pillows. What is it, exactly, about? Vertical sleep that made people feel safe? Was it the illusion of control? The symbolic rejection of death? Or just a convenient way to disguise indigestion? You don't know. But you do know this. You've never once heard of someone dying upright in a Georgian bed. You shift again. Your bolster has migrated slightly, and Pickle is pressing against your Knee like a furry judgment. You give him a nudge. He grunts. You both settle. You think of Lady Fairburn, who famously refused to lie flat even in childbirth, insisting she be propped like a prize-winning melon during labor. She survived. The story became legend. The melon comparison, less so. And then there was Lord Merriweather, who had a custom iron frame installed in his bed to ensure he could not recline beyond a 45-degree angle. He lived to 90 and never once bent his knees on purpose. You laugh a little quietly, which is dangerous because laughter shifts the posture. You lean forward, then backward, recalibrating. There. Acceptable. Respectable. Your Dr. Pembridge once offered you a pamphlet titled The Hidden Perils of Reclamation. Inside, it showed a drawing of a skeleton lying flat with arrows pointing to everything that could go wrong. According to Pembridge, the spine might soften, the lungs might deflate, the soul might get lazy. You've since used it as a coaster. Still, the core idea remains lodged in your bones, like a pillow feather you can't quite find. To lie flat is to surrender. To prop yourself upright is to say, "Not tonight, Death. I have opinions and posture." Pickle snores now, fully horizontal. Completely unbothered, you sigh. Not out of dissatisfaction, but respect. He knows what you don't. That sleep is not a performance. But you're not quite ready to give up the charade. You close your eyes again, breathing in, breathing out, counting not sheep, but names of duchesses who reportedly died with perfect posture and satin nightgowns. You aspire to their grace, if not their gout. And as the flickering shadows from the fire dance across the bed curtains, you find yourself smiling not with joy, but with the grim satisfaction of someone who has, once again, refused to lie down. You're upright, you're moderately comfortable, you're slightly delusional, but most importantly, you're still alive. The days pass as they do in houses with too many clocks and not enough urgency, and suddenly you're staring at the ceiling wondering where the time has gone. Not the polite wondering one does during a garden walk, but the existential kind triggered by a particularly aggressive moth fluttering inside the bed curtains. You swat once, miss, and let it go. Because today, something else is lingering in your mind. Not a ghost. Not indigestion. It's an absence. Not of a person necessarily, but of something faintly forgotten. A whisper of memory too delicate to hold. The kind of thing that seems to drift just outside the corner of your well-powdered eye. You're thinking of the retirements, the disappearances, the final beds, of the women like you who, after years of tea and dreams and goose-feathered dignity, simply vanish from record. You've seen it in the family letters. Lady so-and-so took to her room. She has entered a quieter phase. She is no longer attending luncheons. No scandal. No cause of death. Just soft, subtle departures. As if the aristocracy had mastered the art of slowly evaporating into silk, historians still argue whether these disappearances were acts of agency, quiet tragedy, or simply the natural fade-out of women past the age of public interest. But one thing is clear. The bed became not just a place of sleep, but a chamber of retreat. You once visited a cousin Lady Heloise who had chosen to retire at age 43. Perfectly healthy, still sharp, still devastating at whist. But one morning she announced she was finished with motion and took to her bed. You found her propped up, robe like a curtain, hair braided with improbable precision, surrounded by a miniature library of handwritten notes and pinned fabric samples. She seemed lighter somehow. Not ill, just. Elsewhere. She offered you candied orange peel and spoke at length about clouds. You stayed for an hour. You left feeling both disturbed and deeply jealous. What is it, you wonder now, about this idea of elegant withdrawal? of retiring from the stage of society and choosing instead to remain upright, literally and figuratively within the sanctuary of linen and quiet? There's power in it, because Georgian women were often visible only as long as they were useful, or beautiful, or problematic. But in retreat, they became mysterious. And mystery, as you well know, is the ultimate social currency. Lady Marigold is said to have lived her final 20 years entirely within her red brocade bed, rising only to SIP milk punch or pen observations about bird behavior. Her writing never published was kept in a small velvet pouch under her pillow. When she died, they found 200 pages titled On the Moral Fortitude of Robins. You love that for her. Sometimes, when the light filters just right through, your curtains and your tea is the correct shade of despair, you wonder if you might do the same. Not now, of course, but someday. Slip out of the dinner parties. Drift past the garden promenades. Fade gently into bolster-supported legend. You imagine it. Your name murmured over chessboards. She was terribly witty, you know, and then one day she just stayed in bed. Was she ill? No, just discerning. They'd say it with admiration, a hint of wistful envy. Maybe someone would even try it themselves. A little earlier, a little less gracefully, but you would be remembered for doing it properly, quietly, elegantly, and perhaps intentionally, because in this world of endless etiquette and ceremonial discomfort, choosing your exit is the last true expression of control, not death. Just stillness, just a pause so long it becomes permanent. You glance toward your knitstand. Your journal lies there, spine cracked, ribbon bookmark still missing. You pick it up. Write one line. The bed becomes a ship when you stop asking where it's going. Pickle stirs, sensing a shift in the mood. He turns once, then twice, then resumes snoring. You smile, despite yourself. You're not ready yet. You still enjoy the arguments over tea temperature and the drama of curtain. Cords tangled by ambitious breezes. But the idea is there. Someday. Not today. For now. You'll continue adjusting your pillows, sipping your lettuce tea, and composing sonnets about disappointing marmalade. But in the back of your mind, the bed waits, not as a prison, not even as a throne, but as a quiet, elevated harbor, ready whenever you are to receive your retreat. You're in your room again, not because it's bedtime, not even because you're tired, but because it's simply the best place to be when you're in need of both reflection and somewhere soft to dramatically fall into. But you don't lie down. Of course not. You sit on the edge of your bed and slowly, reverently, lower yourself back into your usual upright cocoon of dignity. Then you notice something odd. A faint odor of lavender and vinegar? Ah, it's laundry day. And here we arrive at a surprisingly important chapter in your upright, sleeping experience, what Georgian laundry smelled like. Because for all the lace and linen and lemon-scented pillows, no amount of decorative stitching can save you from the very real, very damp realities of pre-modern laundry. You inhale again. Yes, rose water, starch, and the sharp tang of soapstone suds. Your freshly laundered sheets have returned from their journey. Boiled, scrubbed, beaten with wooden paddles, rinsed in spring water or well water, depending on how furious your laundress was that morning, and dried in the garden air with floral sprigs pinned to the hems. Historians are in delightful agreement on this. Georgian cleanliness was theatrical. It wasn't just about hygiene, it was about atmosphere. The smell of fresh linen was social shorthand for wealth, respectability, and having multiple women on staff who were good with flat irons and had forearms like marble columns. Your sheets, right now, are so stiff with starch they could stand without you. You climb into them with careful movements, like easing into a freshly painted portrait. The corners crackle. Your pillowcase crunches softly against your ear dot, and yet, it's deeply satisfying. You recall the routine clearly every 10 days. The linens are changed. The old ones are peeled away like onion skin, carried off in large woven baskets, and replaced with fabric that smells faintly of mint, smoke, and that one field where everyone insists the daisies grow straighter than anywhere else. There is a science to it, passed down from laundress to laundress. You once heard your housekeeper mutter, "Too much lavender oil makes her sneeze. Too little makes her say I'm slipping." You've never sneezed. You've also never said she's slipping. But you suspect she enjoys the drama. Your nightgown is fresh as well. The embroidery on the collar is crisp, the sleeves puffed like small soufflés. You feel, in all honesty, slightly edible. Pickle rolls over and sneezes. He disapproves of starch. You do not. You find comfort in it. A sort of structural elegance. When your linens are fresh, you sleep straighter, dream lighter, and wake up feeling as though you've spent the night performing a one-woman show titled The Tragedy of Creaseless Virtue. You once read a poem about clean linen. In folds of white, the mind is clear. No sin survives a starched frontier. It was terrible, but you think about it every laundry day. You've also heard the darker rumors that some households stretch sheets so tightly across mattresses that guests awoke unable to breathe. Or worse, that lower servants were punished by being made to iron in silence, their thoughts carefully steamed out along with every wrinkle. You've never enforced silence, but you have asked that the folds in your pillowcases align with the compass points, not for any reason. Just because. Of course, laundry isn't all rosewater and smugness. There are consequences. Sometimes the sheets are overstarched. Your shins bear the brunt of this. You've come away from a nap looking lightly embossed. Other times, the pressing is too aggressive and your nightcap won't stay on straight. Once your bed smelled faintly of vinegar for a week. You didn't complain. Exactly. You just started quoting Pliny the Elder about mildew until someone took the hint. And yet, you wouldn't trade it for anything. Because there is something sacred, almost divine, about the weight of a freshly laundered counterpane. The way it settles around your legs like a firm suggestion. The way the pillowcases whisper against your cheek like judgmental clouds. The way the subtle scent of soap and sun-dried cotton convinces you, just briefly, that everything is in its place. You wonder if your ancestors felt the same. Did Lady Agnes dream better dreams because her bedsheets were pressed by nuns? Did Lord Falmlinson attribute his successful courtship to the faint scent of thyme in his pillow? Did they, too, reach out in the night, touch the fabric beside them, and think, "Yes, this smells like safety"? The fire crackles in the grate. Your tea has gone cold, but that's fine. Cold tea is just hot tea that's become philosophical. You smooth the covers over your knees. Feel the satisfying snap of pressed fabric beneath your fingertips, and close your eyes. And somewhere in the deep, clean quiet of the evening, you begin to drift, wrapped in starch and lavender, propped like an orchid in bloom and just barely resisting the urge to ring for your maid, only to ask what the laundry schedule is for next week. You're reclining, though, not too far. Let's not scandalize the pillows when a particularly persistent memory floats to the surface. It's not of tea or poetry or even the evening a pigeon mistook your wig for a landing perch during a garden recital. No, this one's a little more humbling. It's the memory of falling, not metaphorically. You physically, and quite gracelessly, slipped out of your bed. It was a Tuesday. You'd been reading a pamphlet on the medicinal benefits of gooseberry tinctures. The bolster behind your left shoulder was poorly tied, a fact you noticed earlier, but chose to ignore, and the silk of your nightgown, new, glossy, and slippery as political promises, had no friction to speak of. And so, Like a very well-dressed log, you slid sideways, out, onto the floor. Pickle, startled, leapt from his blanket fort and landed on your ribs with the full faith of a devoted but spatially unaware companion. You lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, not hurt, not shocked, just deeply inconvenienced. Historians do not often discuss the dangers of high Georgian beds, but you know them intimately. These beds are tall. So tall they require custom furniture to approach. Footstools, handholds, velvet-covered steps that squeak exactly when you least want them, too. You once visited a friend whose bed was so tall it came with an attached railing. Like a ship or a baby's cot. She claimed it was decorative. You suspect it was a necessary compromise with gravity. The truth is, Georgian aristocrats were regularly battling their beds. For all the grandeur, these beds were treacherous. Beasts wrapped in embroidery. The canopy alone could weigh as much as a modest child. The bedposts were carved not just for beauty, but also for stability, though you've seen one too. Many crack under the weight of an over-enthusiastic dog or a guest who mistook the bed frame for a coat rack. And then there's the matter of multiple layers. Your typical bedtime setup involves 2 bolsters, 1 underback cushion, a thigh pillow. You don't know why it's there, but it's tradition, and a night roll, which sounds like a pastry but is, in fact, a sausage-shaped linen tube that you're meant to wrap your arms around for composure. Add a few decorative coverlets, your half-dozing dog, and a book left open on the coverlet, and you're essentially nesting in a soft topographical map of your own making. So of course you fell out once. Everyone does. It's practically a rite of passage. You know a Marchioness who toppled sideways while reaching for her. Bellen had to crawl under her bed to retrieve her pride and her reading spectacles. She claimed it was a devotional exercise. You saw the rug burns. No one believed her. And yet, despite the danger, you persist. Because what's the alternative? A low bed? A horizontal mattress like some uneducated rustic? Never doubt you are a person of elevated sleep. Still, these incidents have consequences. Since the slide, your maid has taken to reinforcing your pillows with extra sashes. She knots them in the back like she's strapping you into a very luxurious carriage. Some mornings you wake up so securely bundled that you must call for assistance, just to escape your own bed. It's humbling. It's also strangely comforting. There is a kind of absurd dignity in being bound upright by silk and social expectation. Think, perhaps, that's the point. Upright sleep isn't about comfort. It's about resistance. Defying gravity. Defying mortality. Defying the idea that one might sprawl into the void with an undignified snore. And besides, most of your furniture agrees with this posture. There's the chaise longue in the music room swooped, angled, and seemingly designed for sighing dramatically. There's the reading settee, curved just so to accommodate one elbow and a volume of melancholy essays. And of course, your nap chair, the infamous piece you once described as a fainting couch for the emotionally composed. It even has a matching blanket embroidered with the phrase, light slumber, heavy thoughts. You sit in it often, sometimes with a book, sometimes with a biscuit, always with the quiet assurance that should you fall asleep in that chair, no one will dare question the posture, because posture in your world equals purpose. And so, even when you do slip, when the bolster gives way or Pickle launches himself across your knees with the enthusiasm of a minor explosion, you always return, back upright, back secure, back into the embrace of a bed that never quite forgets that you fell, but forgives you anyway. You tug the corner of the quilt, feel the satisfying resistance of properly pressed linen, and let out a slow breath. There's dignity in rising, there's charm in almost falling, and there's poetry in the soft. creak of a bed that knows your every move and keeps your secrets stitched tightly into its corners. It's a quiet evening, the sort of evening that seems to be made entirely of candlelight and old floorboards remembering their purpose. You're upright, naturally, nestled in your sea of pillows, nightcap perfectly askew in a way that whispers, "I'm elegant, but I've also suffered." The house has gone still. Pickle snores with quiet conviction. The maid has finished folding your shawls. Your tea has cooled to a polite room temperature. And you? You're reading not just for pleasure. You're reading for battle because tonight you've begun something. Radical, a pamphlet titled On the Normalcy of Reclining, an Enlightenment Argument for Horizontal Sleep. Scandalous. You tuck your feet beneath the counterpane, eyes wide, every sentence feeling like treason. The author, a physician named Dr. Bartholomew Giles, writes in crisp, smug prose. His thesis? Perhaps, he suggests, sleep is not improved by furniture, but simply by surrender. You blink. Look around your bedroom. At the 47. Things required for your bedtime routine. At the faint scent of toasted starch rising from your pillowcases. At the delicate face cloth arranged over your cheek like a shroud for someone who has just passed peacefully into mild annoyance. Surrender? It's absurd. And yet, historians agree, the Enlightenment shook Georgian ideas about everything. Science, reason, philosophy, and yes, even how one ought to sleep. Doctors, newly emboldened by access to microscopes and human cadavers, began, suggesting that perhaps, just perhaps, the body didn't require elaborate architecture to rest. That posture might be about comfort, not morality. You imagine Dr. Giles striding into your bedchamber, gesturing at your bolsters and embroidered shawls, declaring them excessive. You'd report him immediately. But you'd also ask a follow-up question or two, because secretly, very secretly, you have wondered, what would it be like to stretch out? Fully? Arms akimbo? Feet free? Neck at rest? Head flopped to one side like an off-duty poet? The idea is so delicious, so shocking, that you immediately adjust your posture back into proper vertical alignment as penance. Still, the Enlightenment has reached even your world. At last week's salon, a young gentleman recited passages from a French essay claiming that sleeping upright constrains the natural release of nocturnal thoughts. Lady Templeton left early. Lord Algernon nodded for a full minute, then fell asleep upright in his own chair, disproving the theory entirely. The tension is real. Some households are embracing less elevation. Bed frames are lowering. Bolsters are being softened. There's talk of posture neutrality. You once overheard someone refer to an unstructured nightshirt as freeing. You pretended not to hear it, but your left eyebrow twitched for a full hour. It's unsettling, because you've built a life around control, around verticality, around the moral and literal high ground. Letting go of that even a little feels like unbuttoning a corset in public. Possible, but indecent. And yet, the idea persists. You flip to the last page of Dr. Giles' essay. He writes, "Sleep is not a performance. It is the return of the self to the self." You immediately dislike him. And you also immediately consider stitching that line into your pillowcase. You glance at Pickle, who has, without asking permission, sprawled across the lower half of your bed like a miniature rug made of loaf. His entire body is a study in relaxation. His paws twitch as he dreams of something joyous, perhaps cheese. He has no angle, no posture. He is fully horizontal. You sigh. Deeply. You will not lie flat tonight. That would be too much, too soon. You are a creature of tradition, of protocol, of proper spinal incline, but maybe, just maybe, you won't stack the extra bolster tonight. Maybe you'll let your head sink just 1 inch further maybe you'll test the waters of comfort. Because as the enlightenment march forward, and the pamphlets pile up beside your candle, and the world shifts beneath its own weight of pillows and theories, you can't help but feel a slight loosening of the rules. And sometimes, only sometimes, change begins in bed. Tonight, it's just you, the bed, and a decision. The chamber is dim, the fire low, the curtains drawn tight against the outside world, which, at this hour, consists mostly of owls and drafts and at least one gardener who's probably up far. 2 early sharpening head shears out of spite. You pull the quilt up, the embroidered edge brushes your chin. Your nightcap is tilted rakishly as if in quiet rebellion. Your arms are tucked, your ankles crossed like a lady in a portrait, but something's different. You've made your choice. You've removed the top pillow, just one. The one that usually props your shoulders into that medically dubious but socially celebrated 45-degree angle. It now sits politely on the nearby stool, folded like a retiree on holiday. And now, for the first time in a long while, possibly ever, your head rests at a slight decline. Not scandalous. Not fully horizontal. Just a little bit more free. It feels dangerous. It also feels fantastic. Pickle, bless him, notices immediately. He glances up with the wide-eyed concern of a servant who's just walked in on something mildly avant-garde. You smile. He sighs, and slowly, deliberately, he resettles himself beside your hip. Tonight, you're not a monument, not a chaise, not a wax figurine of virtue and posture. You are, at long last, a person in bed. And oh, how strange it is to realize that for so many years, you've been sleeping as a performance. Every pillow an act of resistance. Every ribbon, every bolster, a silent line in a play you didn't audition for, but performed anyway, night after night. Historians may never agree on why Georgian aristocrats did it. Was it fear? Fashion? Folly? A silent battle against the wild? Sprawl of vulnerability? But for you, it was habit, ritual. A scaffold of sleep built from stitched propriety and laced expectation. And now, as your shoulder finds its way into the slight indent of the mattress, as your breath slows and your thoughts begin to unfurl like lavender-scented ribbons in the dark, you begin to let it go. Just a little, just enough, not into chaos. No, never that. But into comfort. You feel the subtle thrill of a neck muscle that no longer has to hold its pose, of a spine that no longer needs to narrate its virtue, of eyelids that close not with ceremony, but with softness. Pickle snores beside you. A kindred soul, finally validated. And you? You're not falling, you're resting, truly. Fully. And now, dear listener, the candles are gone. The room hums with the hush of settled fabric and gentle, invisible things. The bolsters have quieted, the tea has cooled, and the bed, your ship of pillows, lace, and years of dreams, rocks gently in the tides of sleep. There is no posture here anymore. No need to perform. Just the hush of linen over skin, the slow rhythm of breath, and the comforting sense that you are at last allowed to drift. Outside, the wind moves through trees that don't care how high your bed is. The moon hangs above the roofline, indifferent to your angle. Somewhere a bird murmurs into its feathers, and the air shifts in soft circular currents, like the fabric of a nightgown stirred by dreaming. Your dog sleeps. The house sleeps. Even the creaky old beams above seem to settle deeper. Sighing with you, there's no more need for lists, or lace, or linen sermons about blood and pillows. Only this: you are safe, you are held, you are allowed finally to lie however you please, and whether you choose to rise again tomorrow with 1 pillow or 5, in lace or linen or nothing at all, know that the most beautiful part of the night is not the posture. It's the pause. So rest easy now. Let the silence fill in all the spaces where words used to be. And drift. You've earned it.